Let's talk this through by speaking via Zoom. To discuss more on this is a co-founder, Vanguard Africa, Christopher Harvin. Thank you so much for joining us on World Now.
Ibrahim, thank you for having me today.
Now, Nigeria, Congo, Gabon, Madagascar, and Sierra Leone are countries facing elections in 2023, and they will be meeting with the U.S. president to discuss the free and fair election process. How far-reaching do you consider this meeting to go?
I think these meetings are a great start, particularly in the United States, as the United States is a champion of democracy around the world. And the United States has to set that example by leading and assisting African countries in hosting free and fair elections.
Nice. So Nigeria's elections are actually threatened by a long-running insurgency in the northeast, bandit attacks in the northwest, and growing separatist agitations in the southern part of the country, while Liberia and Sierra Leone are still contending with fallout from past civil wars. So how can these countries surmount these hurdles to ensure that their citizens exercise their franchise?
That's a very good question. I think that first and foremost, governments have to take accountability for their democracy. We need leaders that represent democracy, and we need leaders that want the will of the people, the vote of the people, to be actually counted, and that their initiatives help the people. And I think that you're seeing a lot of incursion on the continent from Russia and China. And I think that it's finally important that America gets involved, strengthen trade relations, strengthen democracy, putting in place training mechanisms for various political parties, and ensuring that vote either with outside observers from the EU or the United States or congressional delegations raise the profile on these elections so they can't be stolen.
Makes sense. So the Africa-wide Trade Pact would be the world's biggest free trade zone by area when it becomes fully operational by 2030. And the U.S. will be signing a memorandum of understanding with the Secretariat of the AFCFTA. How would you describe the United States' interest in the AFCFTA?
You know, I think it's twofold. I think the United States does care about Africa. Africa is the fastest growing continent. It has massive resources to share with the world that can benefit for its own development. And I think in its own way, the U.S. is looking to secure their interest on the continent. As we talked about briefly, China and Russia are very active on the continent. So I think the U.S. has to be more involved. I think that we have to signal that we're willing to put investment in, we're willing to build infrastructure in Africa, and we're not just willing to lecture Africa on what they do wrong or what we want to do, that Africa has a voice, particularly in Nigeria, particularly in Congo. These are important countries to the global trade, to resources, and I do think that the U.S. needs to listen more and help them. You know, the African countries know what they need, and the U.S. can help guide them, teach them, and be a mentor to them.
Well, so in all of these, Africa has become, cynosure of world powers, and it does appear that growing interest is reminiscent of the scramble for and partition of Africa following the Berlin Conference of 1884 to 85. Is this summit's strategic plan to draw Africa closer to the United States so that America can continue to exert its strong influence on the continent, especially, as you mentioned, the influence of China and Russia has grown tremendously?
Well, I think it's twofold. I think that in one opportunity, it's a way to put all the leaders of Africa in a room and have the tough conversations and have the conversations about democracy, about terrorism. You know, how do we work together? How do we grow the continent for its well-being? But as you've seen in other summits with the EU, China, Turkey, Russia, and with the U.S., it is an opportunity for the U.S. To build relationships, to increase trade, and increase the opportunity to speak with African leaders on our concerns in the United States.
So going back to earlier conversation, where the U.S. president actually said he's committed to free and fair election process, what exact role do you think they will be playing? Are they going to be deploying technology to monitor some of these elections? And if that is the case, what exact role do you think they'll be playing in this electioneering process come 2023?
So I think a couple things here. I think indirectly, the United States will play in this. I think, and directly they'll play with this. So from a perspective of the State Department, the White House, they care about stability in the continent, and they care about the will of the people and the interest of the people, so that there's just not a few handfuls of leaders in various countries getting rich or milking the countries for their own reasons. So I think that in a way, civil societies need to be propped up. There needs to be delegations of election monitors. There needs to be, how do we actually execute free and fair elections? And that starts with the UN, with the US, with the EU, and helping the countries in Africa deploy these free and fair elections, and that every vote cast by the people is counted for the people and then is actioned into government representation.
If you look at what is going on social media, especially in this part of the world, Nigeria, where the youth, those who are social media savvy, are actually, causing a lot of furore on the social media, attacking people, attacking personalities, and the issue of people saying how election will definitely go, which might result to violence. But then the leaders of African countries are saying they don't want any kind of violence. So will the US be sanctioning, one way or the other, anyone found wanting of electoral malpractice?
So that's an interesting question, because the EU, London, and the US really care about free and fair elections. They care about corruption. And they care about democracy building. So I think that there will be opportunities like you've seen in Congo in the past with the election commission, with various leaders, that if there's a threat to democracy, that sanctions of the Magnitsky Act could be used. And I do think that it's of the interest of the world to have free and fair elections, because what we ultimately want is stability on the continent, and we want a prosperous Africa.
You must also have been, monitoring the election process and, build up to the 2023 elections. What exactly are your own concerns, your own fears, worries as regards this election come 2023?
I think that you spoke briefly about the youth, and I think the youth are in a very important voting bloc in Africa, and not just a voting bloc, but an economic bloc. We need to have strong policies in place to educate, to find jobs, to create that stability and that happy balance in Africa. And I think that voting bloc receives inaccurate information sometimes. So I think the biggest thing we can do is make sure the credibility of the elections, the flow of information is accurate, and that people actually understand the truth. You see a lot of information operations, a lot of rumors, and these are very dangerous on the continent. Often lead to violence. And I also think that polling and the civil society groups that are working, and election groups that are working in Africa, have to be very accurate about the information they're putting out, because it can destabilize countries.
Makes sense. Co-founder, Vanguard Africa, Christopher Harvin, thank you so much for your keen of insight on this.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here today.